Hi, Nish.
Hi, Marie.
How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
hmm Excellent. Happy to be here. Looking
Yeah,
forward to this.
yeah, me too. So today we're going to be asking the question, what is it that human beings really want?
Mm.
What is it that we really desire? We're not going to go into what is desire and why does it arise and so on. That's a slightly deeper subject. But today we'll just look at what are the things that human beings really want? Is there something really fundamental that just shows up in different ways, in different cultures, different contexts, different stages of development?
My mind is going all over the place, and it feels like there are some fundamentals.
So I'm going to suggest a fundamental, and then we'll start looking at specific desires. You
Okay.
don't have to necessarily show in each and every case how it's a manifestation of the fundamental ones, but we can just keep that as a background in our minds
Okay.
that these are really different forms of the same thing. So my suggestion is that in Hinduism, the ultimate reality is referred to as Sat Chit Ananda. Sat
hmm
Chit Ananda. What that means is Sat means being, Chit means consciousness, and Ananda means bliss. So the ultimate reality in Hinduism is being, consciousness, bliss. And people have tied that in with the Holy Trinity and Christianity. Father is being, the Son is consciousness, the Holy Spirit is bliss. So why I'm getting into
Interesting.
this, why I'm getting into this is my suggestion is that what we most fundamentally want as human beings, by the very nature of things, is being consciousness bliss, because that is our true deepest nature. So to expand that a little, being, we want to be rather than not be. We want to live rather than die. We want to exist rather than not exist. That's a very fundamental desire. Most people want to live, they don't want to die. Consciousness, that's the second one. We want to know things rather than be ignorant. We want to be aware rather than be left in the dark.
Mm.
And
hmm
number three, bliss. We want to be happy rather than unhappy. We want pleasure rather than pain.
hmm
So this is my suggestion that all these different types of desire we'll be looking at ultimately are going to come down to different manifestations of these three fundamental desires: being, consciousness, bliss. To be rather than not be,
hmm
to know rather than not know, to be happy rather than to be unhappy.
hmm
So comments on that before we proceed?
That's a fantastic foundation. It seems like it is an essence
Mm,
of the other things that were running in my mind. So, what a great place to build from.
great. And I think my suggestion is that it couldn't have been anything else because that's the nature of reality, being consciousness bliss. That's the mystical view anyway, which I
Mm-hmm.
personally subscribe to. So,
Mm-hmm.
so the first one, we want to survive. Basic survival needs, basic physiological needs: food, clothing, shelter, sex. If these four things are not met, no other desires really matter that much,
Mm-hmm.
because these are the foundational things. And obviously we can see this comes from being, in the being, consciousness, bliss trinity. This is to be rather than not to be, effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Second thing I'll suggest is we want to be safe. We want to be safe, out of danger. We want to belong somewhere, to a group, to a tribe, to a family. We want connections with other people. We don't want to be all alone.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I would say, after the survival and physiological needs, that's probably the next most fundamental desire that we have.
Mm.
And we can see we're constantly seeking that out, trying to put ourselves in more and more safe situations, finding groups and tribes and families we can belong to. If we don't have that with our family of origin, we find our own family, we create our own family. We
Mm-hmm.
join groups, we join clubs, we join churches, we find connections with others. Um, and this is also to do with being consciousness and bliss in a slightly
Mm.
more advanced way.
And I want to add that without that, you're not likely to survive.
Yes, exactly.
And this is where, relationship and what does it mean to be in relationship and with who, with what,
Yeah.
which can come in many different forms. But mhm, very good
So, so in one word, we want to survive, and we want
to
to
belong.
to belong, to be in relationship with other people, at least at the most fundamental level of belonging and
Hmm.
feeling safe with
Hmm.
others, having a connection with others, but ideally to belong in to some kind of group. We want to be members of something, not just
Hmm.
isolated all by ourselves.
Yes, which is impossible, right? To be isolated and completely by yourself.
Mm,
And what was going on in my mind was trying to reconcile with people who are like, okay, that's it. I'm retreating from the world and I'm going to a cave or
mm,
to a
mm,
cabin in the woods. Um, and while that might be something that they do, and maybe they survive, and maybe they don't, but probably at the uh, it, th that might come as a reaction to
mhm.
not belonging and being in bad
Yeah,
relationship
yeah,
before when and maybe strange as this is something when what you desire so badly, you know, to be in relationship with another human,
mhm,
and then you leave it for well, a number of other reasons, trauma and other previous experiences, things to that effect. And there can be what's the word? Altruistic motivations for it, meditating in a cave, something to that effect. Anyways, so this is great. This is very complicated
mm.
and complex. Great.
That's such an
Tell me.
important because
Mm-hmm.
I think most people are going to have some kind of desire. One of the sort of 8 or 9 that we're going to go through today.
Mm-hmm.
If one of those desires is frustrated, we'll find another desire to give meaning to our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's desire that can give meaning
Mm-hmm.
to our lives. If we lose desire for everything, we're either enlightened or we're depressed, or the other. Yeah. So most of us need some kind of desire, some kind of goal, even if it's very implicit. And if one doesn't
Mm-hmm.
work, we'll find another one.
Mm-hmm.
So if the belonging and the safety and the connection didn't work, we'll find another one. And that could be just being on your own and having basic survival.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and quickly I'll say, but
Mm,
that's bringing up for me is that um, how your desires can control you.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a desire and the will to live, which may the will to live, right? And so our meaning making that creates the space for this myriad of desires that we may attach to as a part of our will to live,
Yeah.
and that unconscious desires will control you. And even sometimes in our attempt to control our
Hmm.
desires control us.
Hmm.
I might be getting ahead, but okay, great.
No, no, this is great. I mean, if we say that our nature is being consciousness bliss, and if we say that each of these desires is a form of that in some way,
Correct.
then we can even go further and we can say it's not that this is me and I have these desires. We could even go further and say
Mm,
this whole matrix of desires is actually who I am.
correct.
There's no self separate from that. That's kind of choosing. It may feel like that, but that's not because we don't have enough self-awareness. In
Right.
reality, I think that entire matrix of desires, which is being consciousness bliss, is who we are, which is why it controls us, because it is us.
Right.
Take away
Yes.
desire and you take away self. We're gone. We're not there anymore.
Correct.
Either we're enlightened or we're dead.
Correct.
Those are the only two ways not to be there anymore. So,
Oh,
okay. So, number three,
so much fun.
this is
Great.
good. This is good.
Thanks.
So,
Mm,
number three, the desire for power, the desire to
mm,
have the power to do what I want to do, the desire for freedom to live out my desires in the world, the
mhm,
desire to dominate others to get my way, the desire to manifest my will and my willpower, and the
mm,
desire to be strong rather than weak and to have my strength seen and validated.
mhm, mhm. That I am, I exist. Hear
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
see
see me.
me.
Yeah, don't screw with me.
Yes.
And I'm going to get what I want, and you're going to do what I tell you to do. So this is now the first egoist. This is the ego has now
Mhm,
arisen. Before it was
mhm,
just basic stuff, survival,
mhm,
belonging. But now we're seeing, as we're moving
mm,
to more and more subtle desires, less and less fundamental desires, more and more
mm,
significant desires.
mhm.
Because remember, the more fundamental something is, the less significant it is. The more significant something is, the less fundamental it is. So fundamental and significant are
No, that's
opposites.
fine.
So we're moving now away. The most fundamental ones were survival and belonging. Now we're
Belonging.
starting to go to slightly more significant ones: power,
Mhm.
domination, strength.
And what I'm noticing is um, there are steps to that lead to the capacity to be an I
Mm,
in our biophysiological cognitive development.
mm, mm,
There's a pathway, right, that opens
mm.
and presents the possibility for the rest of us.
And I think part of that is that these earlier desires that we mentioned are fulfilled. Because I think
Uh-huh.
there's like a certain order in which these desires typically arise. And the later ones are built on the foundations of the earlier ones being fulfilled. So
Hmm.
we don't have enough food to eat, we're not going to worry too much about having our personal strength validated.
Hmm.
It's not fundamental enough. So we survive, we belong, we assert. That's
Hmm.
kind of the way I'm seeing this develop.
hmm It seems there's a process that's pulling us.
Mm, mm. But we can see this in children as they grow up, I think. And we
Hmm
can see this in the history of human beings. Uh, this is how different desires have come on board.
hmm hmm
So,
Cool.
survival, belonging, power. Okay. Number 4, we desire order rather than disorder.
Mm,
We desire order rather than chaos. We
mm,
desire stability rather than instability.
mm,
We desire us and people around us to follow certain rules and to respect certain legitimate authority,
mm,
whether ours or somebody else's.
hmm
So this is now about order, stability, rules. We desire,
hmm
most of us don't desire to live in an absolutely chaotic um, anarchy. Most of us don't desire that.
hmm
And
hmm
in our personal lives, most people don't actually, even though a lot of people do live in a mess, I don't think most of us actually plan for that. I think most of us want a reasonably ordered life.
hmm 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 Which is interesting because, um, with the order, there's a certainty,
Yeah, exactly.
right, that comes with things, and uh, a generalization of that point of view could be masking all of the potential that's actually here
Mm-hmm.
in all of reality. So having that that desire as a pathology uh, could be a cause for some suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also seeing that um, that this desire would arise as a part of the complexity that previous humans were dealing with in the environments around them as certain things changed for us in terms of like agriculture and needing to be
Mm-hmm.
able to create a civilization, have an
Yeah.
agreement, a desire to be able to go to the market and not have to uh, chaotically
Mm-hmm.
avoid every other horse or car that's on the road.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And not expect to be robbed every couple of steps.
Oh, that would be helpful too.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you said something there early on, which was really important, the desire for certainty, because
Yes.
that's part of this. We want order, we want stability, we want rules, we want authority, because we want to be certain. We want to be certain
Mm,
life is going to go on, that I can live here in an ordered and safe and manageable way. And part of that, an offshoot of
mm,
that, is the desire. We go back to our being, consciousness, bliss. The second one, consciousness, the need to know rather than not know. I need
yes.
to know what the rules are, how this society is going to work. And a bit more abstract, but it's part of it. I need to know what to believe, religion, um, politics, whatever, how the world is run, how the world works. I want to be certain about how everything hangs together. Because my
Yes.
order and stability, it's not just external, it's my internal order and stability as well, which belief gives me.
Absolutely.
So we want that.
Yes.
That's also being consciousness bliss.
And I need to know what the
Mm.
rules are so that I don't risk not belonging.
Right, exactly, exactly. So these 4 that we've done so far, I would say these are the more fundamental things we need just to
mm.
the more fundamental desires, so that we can live, relatively safe and, but for most people, relatively happy, calm, ordered lives. We survive, we belong, we have power, and we have order. So these are kind of the fundamental desires, I would say. We want to survive rather than die. We want to belong rather than be alone or be an outcast. We want to
Hmm.
have power rather than like be a slave. And we want to have order rather than chaos. So I would say these
Yeah.
are all pretty fundamental desires.
And I would say in the power, so there's a desire to be me.
Yeah, 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 exactly. The desire to be, that desire for individuality starts to come on board, I think, for the first time at that desire.
Being consciousness bliss as
Mhm.
me.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's to be, I'm me. That's consciousness, I'm me. And it's bliss because I can do what I want.
Mm,
So for all of these three
hmm.
feeding in, yeah.
Fun.
I can see a matrix that needs to be built here.
I know.
Desiring
Yes.
down there and being consciousness bliss up there. And we'll have a matrix of desires. Mm.
I've got some ideas, but that's
Excellent.
for probably another chat. But I love
So
the
let's,
way that what you're pointing to in the matrix, right? That some of them
mhm.
are dependent on the other, et cetera,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like, so there's this
exactly.
whole
Yeah,
interplay that happens. It's
yeah,
fantastic. Okay, great.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So I'd say we've done the first half. We've done the sort of fundamental
Okay.
things that you need to basically have a semi-decent life. But for a lot of people, that's not enough. We want more. So when we say we want
Mm,
more than just these fundamental things. Now we're moving from the fundamental desires to what we can call the significant desires. Now
mm,
we want more than just the fundamental stuff. We want more than the basics. These four things are the basics. Now we want more than the basics. Now we want to actually
mm,
shine and prosper and grow and have significance in the world beyond just surviving in this ordered fashion.
mm,
So I would say this is part two. These are the significant desires. So I'd say the first of these is achievement. We want to achieve
mm,
things. We want to be successful rather than failures. We want to be individuals rather than merely being swallowed up in the group or swallowed up in some tradition or swallowed up in some routine. We want to stand out in some way. We want to be
mm,
somebody rather than be nobody. We want to be rational. We want to think clearly rather than just believing all this stuff other people are telling us. We want to think for ourselves critically. We want to have the right to believe what we want to believe. Freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of action, my rights. I want my rights.
mm,
That didn't even come up in the first four fundamental desires.
mm,
And I want to create. I want to be able to innovate and create things that weren't there before. I want to leave my mark
mm,
as a separate, achieving individual. So that's the foundation of what it is to be significant.
mm, mm. What's coming up for me is how, so in order for this to stand out,
Mm,
significance, then how much it is dependent on the foundational, the fundamental.
yeah, very much. Almost
Mm,
completely.
yeah. And that there's something about so curious in the desire to be significant, not just existing,
Mm,
um, which seems like this is a big difference. Well, I'm sure we've talked about other things that are big differences between human and non-human animal consciousness. But
Mm, mm,
um,
mm.
like I don't know, I don't think my dog gets significance
No, probably not. Because I
as a
think
desire, right?
to get significance, we need conceptual thinking, because we need to start thinking over periods of linear time.
Right.
And I
You're
think
right.
that's a human development in the last maybe 10,000 years. It's not even ancient human, it's a relatively recent human thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, and isn't it interesting because in order to say that there's the desire to be significant, well, that's saying something about the previous levels that's saying they're not significant,
And that's how
right?
the person who is desiring for significance would see those previous desires, which is why he wants these new desires, because the previous fundamental desires are no longer enough.
That's so curious. Mm-hmm.
I think new and more sophisticated
Hmm.
and more advanced, if you like, desires arise because either we've just fulfilled the previous ones and now we're bored, we want something else to do. That's that's fulfilled its function and we now need something more to give meaning to our lives. Or we think we experience them as just not enough anymore. Living in a small town, having a nice ordered life where I belong and I'm safe and I've got enough food just isn't enough for a lot of people.
This is when you still think, though, that you're the one with desires.
Yes. And that I think will be there throughout until we reach a very high stage of development.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think throughout this we've got that sense of separate self who's
Mm-hmm.
wanting these things. Maybe in reality that's not the case, but that's the construct that we're operating under when we're
Mm-hmm.
moving through this spectrum of desires.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so a bit more significant now, even more significant, which means less fundamental, because we're moving away from fundamental and into
Right.
more significant, which means less and less people are going to have these desires, because most people are still trying to fulfill
Mm-hmm.
their fundamental desires.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have the luxury necessarily of the significant ones, or they're just a dream, pipe dream.
Yes, the only thing I'll say about
Yeah,
that is I'm not sure which one is better or more right, if there's going to be, because there's some sense of being satisfied and content at the fundamental that
yeah,
leaves space for an experience with life
yeah.
that potentially these significant desires could get in the way, potentially.
So I think that's a great question. And what really I think you're asking is what's better, the fundamental or the significant? And in a, I think an argument, they're both better in different ways.
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the fundamental lays the
exactly. Hmm.
foundation and satisfies our most basic need. Without that foundation, we are dysfunctional and pathological. So it's
Yes.
better in that way.
Well,
Significant is
hmm
better because it's more complex. It can see more, it can do more, it can experience more deeply,
hmm
but it's completely dependent on the fundamental. So
hmm
if you're in a building, do you want to live on the ground floor or do you want to live on the fifth floor? There's
It
advantages
depends
to
on
both.
if you have two dogs.
Yeah, it does. So that introduces a third dimension to the matrix. So
All
we'll
right.
come to that. Okay, next desire, more significant still, desire for community. Now we saw this earlier in we had a desire for safety and
Belonging.
belonging earlier. That was a more fundamental desire, like my family or my tribe. This is now a more global desire. I want to belong to a big community, not just my family or not
Mm,
just my tiny little tribe. I want to
mm,
belong to the world.
hmm
I want to be a citizen of the world, not just
mm,
an Indian or British or whatever.
hmm
And as part of that, I desire to see a fair world. I desire equality for people. I desire harmony between people. I desire social justice. I
Mm-hmm.
desire the ability to love others and have empathy for others. I
Mm.
desire them to love me and have empathy for me. I want to be seen deeply. I want to see
Mm.
others deeply.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this is now a more global desire to belong, whereas the previous, more fundamental one was a very local desire to belong.
Mm-hmm.
This has
And
now
I,
reappeared in a much bigger context.
yes, and I desire for those that don't have the same significant desires that I have,
Mm-hmm.
that I've fulfilled, to have theirs fulfilled, which
Right.
leads to
Yeah.
equality.
Equality and fairness. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I desire the good for the many. I desire the greatest
Mm-hmm.
good for the largest number of people.
Mm-hmm.
That's that's a very significant desire. But it's not very fundamental at all. But it's a very significant desire. It's a big, big desire that can change the world.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not basic.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got basic desires that are absolutely foundational, but they're not going to change the world in any big way. They're not going to affect anybody other than me and my immediate circle. And then you've got the big
Right.
desires, which can really change society, that can have an impact,
Mm.
but they're not basic. They're, they're, they're big, they're impactful.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, it's a shame we have to choose between the two because both are so important in different ways. We
They
want all the
are.
basic stuff done, but we also want to make an impact. We don't want to have to choose between the two. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the whole way being consciousness bliss, which is our true nature, is evolving to more and more complex forms in us and as us.
And there's some of so I was thinking, oh, you've got to have, the basics, the fundamental foundational desires fulfilled before you can have these more significant or fulfill these more significant desires. But I think um um where am I trying to go with this? I think that well, there's a difference that happens here in terms of your orientation as to what's driving your desire, in that potentially at the foundational or basic, it's more centered on you and
Mhm.
on, right, on your own sort of survival. Whereas in this desire to have, for everyone to have significant, fulfill their significant desires, that, um, but there might be an illusion potentially there that if we don't have these other ones taken care of, that they're not going to be taken care of. And so we want to go down to the other ones. And sometimes that is necessary, but potentially in leaders that we have seen that do have that impact and change the world, they stay focused on those significant desires being fulfilled for all, or something to that effect. That makes some sense. I mean, it's true in some ways, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always possible to take a desire to a level where it becomes pathological. It's always possible to see or not see the need for the earlier desires to be in place before the new desire can work.
I think what I was getting to is this is the trust. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
cut you off, right? Because if
Oh,
you can still align to the significant desire that we're describing here
mm,
to be fulfilled by as many people as possible, you trust that your desires, your more foundational, fundamental desires will be met, potentially.
right, right. Yeah. So I think the nature of our vision and the nature of our faith and the nature of our trust changes, I think, as we move from fundamental to
I
significant.
heard somebody's going to talk about that at some point.
Yeah, there's
Wink,
a talk
wink.
coming up about that very soon. This really clever guy is going to be talking about that soon. So, but the other point you made earlier is that what drives these desires, and I think the most fundamental thing, again, being consciousness bliss,
Mm,
being and consciousness implies bliss. So what drives these desires is being and consciousness, who we are and what we can see. What's our sense of self and what can we see? If all you can see is yourself, your body, and 10 feet around you, your desire is just going to be to survive. And as we move from fundamental to significance to significant, we just see more and more and more and more and more. And as we see more, our desires become more. We change. Our desires
mm-hmm,
become more significant. It's like
mm-hmm,
going up stories in a
mm-hmm,
building.
mm-hmm,
Say I'm on the ground floor of a building and 2 streets away, someone has just fallen off their bike and they need help. I'm not going to desire to help them if I'm on the ground floor because I can't see them.
mm,
I don't know that thing is there. I don't
mm,
know. I need to be on the second or third floor to be able to see 2 or 3 streets away to see that I need to
mm,
help the person who's fallen
mm,
off the bike.
mm-hmm,
So as we move from fundamental to significant, we move up these stories and we can see more and more and more. And so the desire for equality and community and social justice is not going to be even seen as a necessity by somebody whose main desire is
mm-hmm.
order, rules, and certainty.
Mm-hmm.
So
If they've never ascended that.
if they haven't ascended to that stage. So who we are and what we can see. And using integral language, we move from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric
Mm-hmm,
to cosmocentric. So we have
mm-hmm,
ego desires, ethnic desires, world desires, cosmic desires. So the ego desires are the like survival and safety and power.
mm-hmm,
The ethnic desires would be like order and stability and rules. The world desires would be, say, achievement and success, equality, community, social justice. And then as
mm-hmm,
we become more and more significant, we'll start moving into the more cosmic desires
mm-hmm,
because we can see more and more. And so we see the need for more and more things to happen. And that's why the desires arise.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm,
Okay, next one, the desire to understand. The desire to understand how it all works, how it all fits together. I look around and I see all these culture wars and different people holding different views and people fighting and people in other countries who hold views and ways of life that seem ridiculous.
mm-hmm,
I want to understand how it all works. I want to understand the pattern that connects all these different views and perspectives and desires. What's the big picture? I want to understand the big picture. That's a drive in some people. I want the flexibility to be able to move around these different ways of life and these different systems and be able to survive and prosper in all of these different systems and ways of life and ways of being.
mm-hmm,
I desire the ability to see things from other people's points of view. I
mm-hmm,
desire to be able to take multiple perspectives. In the words of Spock, because everything comes down to Star Trek in the end. In the words of Spock in the movie Into the Darkness, I was holding all of those multiple perspectives at the same time. We desire that. So now this is very, very significant. We're now coming to
mm-hmm,
the cutting edge of human desire, pretty close to that now.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And is So you said the desire to understand.
Yeah.
And my question is understand the best word or experience?
Yeah. I mean, I think understand and then experience.
Mm,
So we want to understand the other person's point of view, and then we want to be able to experience and step into that point of view.
some part of it, yes.
Yeah. So we
Uh-huh.
we see it,
Yeah.
and then we can be it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a big shift.
Yeah.
That's a very, very big shift
Yeah.
to be able to move into that other
Yeah.
perspective and have the felt sense.
Yeah.
Um, some, anyways.
And I think that is a desire now that is arising in that small percentage of people.
Yes. And I would imagine that the desire, another desire at this level is integration.
Yeah. Yeah. We want to see the pattern that connects them all and integrate
See
them
the
all.
pattern and be able to integrate the different
Mm.
perspectives
Yeah. In the way we see and also in the way we be.
because we desire a better experience for
Yeah.
ourselves and for all of life on the
And for
planet.
the world. Yeah. And people who have this desire, they're actually seeing the need for this for the first time.
Mm.
Mm.
This seems like so while it feels like there is the desire to understand, potentially as the priority,
Mm.
um, which would be from an intellectual
Mhm.
point of view, that this other experience is I mean, that's a very vulnerable place to put yourself into, too. So there is an opening that happens here. You have to open to fulfill this desire to have that experience of
Mhm.
some of another person's perspective and um, which is I'm thinking really brings in the heart.
Yes, absolutely. And going back to being consciousness bliss, we have the consciousness first here in this example. We have to be able to see the perspectives. Then we move to being. We want to move into being able to embody those perspectives. And then we move to bliss. We see a happiness and a joy that comes from integrating all of that.
Hmm.
And the
And yeah, go
mm,
ahead.
and what you mentioned about opening and becoming vulnerable, I think as our desires become more and more and more significant, that is concomitant with this opening all the way through. There
Hmm.
is this universal spectrum of progressive opening.
Hmm.
Mm.
I want to say that this is uh, what I'm sensing is that in this also you get a sense of all of the possibility that's here, and but there's also discernment.
Yep, yep, absolutely, which comes on board now, I think, for the first time in a big way. So the previous desire we looked at, which is just the desire for equality and social justice and harmony and peace and love, that can be what we can call diversity without discernment.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's kind of initial world centric,
Hmm.
idealistic world centric.
Hmm.
When we move to wanting to understand and wanting to see the big picture, how it all fits together, how we can integrate it, we've got diversity with discernment, and that's a more mature world centric desire.
And coming back to the fundamental desires, if that is all you experience, there's some fear to opening up in this way. I think that I mean walk them through to the point where we said at the last sort of fundamental desire is the need for order
Yeah.
and a certainty and what was the other word? There was a word that you used.
Stability,
Yeah, stability,
rules,
which means,
authority, order,
yeah,
stability, rules, authority.
and to be open up in this other way that we're describing them, these significant desires, um, requires this grounding from the fundamental
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, yeah.
desires. Um,
If we open up prematurely,
yeah.
that can be pathological. It will be just too fearful and traumatic for
Mm,
us.
exactly.
If we start to desire things that we're not ready for, it can be very stressful and anxious,
Mm,
provoking, anxiety provoking. If, on the
mm-hmm,
other hand, desires that are ready to come forth, but we don't allow them to come forth, that can lead to depression. So too fast up, anxiety and stress, not fast up enough, depression.
mm-hmm. Good.
And then the final desire, perhaps at this stage, our ultimate desire, is the desire for some kind of spiritual awakening. So
Mm,
the global universal consciousness, the desire to truly see and experience the interconnectedness of all things, the desire to live in a holistic way, wholes and parts, no
mm,
fragments, the desire
mm-hmm,
to transcend these boundaries, to transcend and include all the boundaries that we're now aware of. And this is pushing us now into the pinnacle of world-centric and intercosmocentric.
mm-hmm,
This is kind of the pinnacle of where we are at the moment as human beings. And probably, 1 in 500 people probably have this desire. It's a minority desire. And that's to be expected because you've got to fulfill all these other difficult desires first before this desire even really makes any sense. Otherwise, we're spiritually bypassing. You see,
mm,
if we try to go for desire 10 before we've fulfilled desire 5, that's a kind of bypassing. It can
mm-hmm,
be a kind of escape, idealistic escape, because we don't know how to fulfill desire 5, or we think desire 5 is beyond us. So we can't get meaning from that. So we try to get meaning in something we're not ready for. Very common,
mm-hmm.
very common.
That's another talk.
Yeah. So you can go to spiritual events all over the Western world and the Eastern world. It's not the West. Spiritual events. Go around the spiritual seeking circuit, and you'll find some wonderful people and some very dysfunctional people. And the
Mm-hmm,
dysfunctional people, what they need is not spiritual. They need to go back and fulfill some of these earlier fundamental desires
mm.
before these later desires can even come on board. Otherwise, we're bypassing,
Yes, which is unhealthy and
which is
toxic
unhealthy. And it won't work.
and causes suffering for yourself and those around you.
And it won't work because you're trying to build the 10th floor of a house before you've built the 5th floor. It's just going to collapse. It's not going to stand.
Uh-huh.
You have to
Mm-hmm.
build a building in order, almost by definition.
Now, this takes I'm imagining a radical perspective shift
Mm.
and being consciousness bliss.
Yes. So by the time we've come to this final desire, we're now getting pretty close to what's been driving us all along, which is being consciousness bliss.
Mm-hmm.
And see
Mm-hmm.
how that being consciousness bliss has started with ego being consciousness bliss, ethnic being consciousness bliss, world being consciousness bliss, and now cosmic, which is where being consciousness bliss really belongs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why when we fulfill our deeper spiritual desires, there's a sense in which we get that sense that, this is what I really wanted all along. I was
Mm.
just looking for it in all the wrong places. And yet, paradoxically, you needed to go through that. You needed to do the
Mm.
wrong places before you get to the real final answer.
There's
That's
a
the
needing to have
paradox
those
of it.
insights and to expand your awareness
Yeah.
as you're moving up, because you can see then that you were the one actually, well, not you like intentionally or something like that, right? But it's, don't question any moment
Mm.
sort of in the life that's led you to this thing, although that's needs to not be taken out of context. But my point is that um when you do and you look back, you can see how you were the one that created the separation.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You can look back at that point and see the whole journey and how being consciousness bliss was taking all these different forms. And it was really just you all along, because being consciousness bliss is who you really are. That's your true nature.
Mhm.
And that true nature is just playing hide and seek with itself. Oh, okay.
Cool.
So there we are.
That's
What do we
fun.
really want? An exploration of human desire. We got that sorted. So next time, here's a suggestion for next time, the next conversation. What can we know, and
Hmm.
how do we know?
Oh, this will be fun.
What can we know and what can't we know? What are the valid ways of knowing and what are the questionable ways of knowing?
Mm, my
Until
brain's
then,
already going.
yeah.
Wonderful.
Until
Thanks,
then,
Nash.
may the force be with you.
Yes. Live long and prosper.
Yeah. Live long and prosper, and may all your desires be fulfilled.
Yes. Yeah. Love your desires.
Yeah. Because they are you.
Yeah.
You are your desires.
Very cool. Thanks so much. Lots of fun.
Yeah.
Take care,
Thank you
dear.
so much. Take
See
care.
you
See you
next
soon.
time. Mm-hmm.